try that again. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all here. Welcome to this town meeting. My name is Owens. We're here from you today. He also is going to share with you what's been going on in Washington. Your United States Senator Bernie Sanders.
Excuse this interruption.
No, you are interrupting. No, you're not excused. No, ma'am. Excuse me. This is a democratic meeting, and you are denying. There are people here who want to have a discussion. If you have a question you would like to ask the question. Don't disrupt a meeting. Okay.
Why are you voting for Israel?
Okay. You have a question to ask? I have to complete. It bothers me very much that we would have to call in the law enforcement people so that we can have a chat. You don't have a right to disrupt meetings. You have a right to ask a question, but not. How many people here would like us to continue with the meeting? All right, thank you. Our first panelist is Anthony Pollina. Many of you know Anthony. Anthony is a state senator from Washington County.
Thank you all for being here on Saturday. I do appreciate it. I also apologize ahead of time for having to leave early, but as Bernie said, I have somewhere else I have to go. It's actually one of those busy days, but I frankly didn't want to miss the opportunity to spend some time with the best United States Senator in the United States of America. Like a lot of us, and like Bernie particularly, and this is really the topic of the day, I am really concerned about what's happening to the middle class and working class families here in the state of Vermont and around this country. I'm particularly concerned that as we pull out of the so-called Great Recession, we're developing an economic recovery that's leaving a lot of people behind. And in fact, what we're doing is institutionalizing growing poverty, or institutionalizing growing inequality in a way that is completely unacceptable. We sometimes have to ask, in Montpelier, we're always told we don't have money to do things. And I ask myself all the time, like, where did the money go? How is it that in this state and in this country at this period in time, we don't have the money to do things we need to do? How is it that our parents and grandparents are able to build the roads and bridges and develop social programs, and now we cannot even afford to maintain those roads and bridges or maintain those social programs? But it's very clear when you look at the numbers, and it's not just rhetoric. Family income in Vermont is lower than it was 10 years ago. You'll often these days hear the governor say, family income in Vermont is up this year over last year, and that's great. It's higher this year than it was last year. It's lower than it was in 2005. When it comes to wages, people on the highest end of the wage scale, people who are making $40 an hour and more, they've seen their wages go up over the last couple of years. For the rest of us, wages have been stagnant or have in fact gone down. When we look at income overall, in the state of Vermont, these are numbers from the Vermont Tax Department. The wealthiest Vermonters, the millionaires and the close to millionaires, have seen their incomes go up 75% in the last 4 years. For the rest of us, incomes have been stagnant. For many people, income has in fact gone down. And that's why the top 2% of Vermonters now control or earn, I don't know whether earn is the right word, but end up with 25% of the wealth in this state. If they've tripled their share of the wealth in the last 25 years, and along with that has been an increase in child poverty. 1 out of 6 Vermonters are on food stamps, and a lot of people, we can get up in the morning and go to work, cannot afford to make ends meet. And again, it's not rhetoric, it's not things that Bernie and I just talk about to rile people up. It's the reality for many Vermonters, and it's there in the numbers. And one of the things I want to mention particularly, and I think this will be part of the conversation that Bernie has as well, one of the costs that continues to go up and has a very negative impact on the state of Vermont is the cost of a state college education. The average Vermont family can now spend about 30% of their income trying to send their kid to a Vermont state college. And in America right now, we have colleges that are unaffordable for most citizens, most young people. In Vermont, we talk about how are we going to keep kids in the state of Vermont? Well, we're all lamenting the loss of young people. One of the best ways to keep people in the state of Vermont is to send them to Vermont State College, which you know that about 80% of people who go to Vermont State Colleges stay in Vermont, raise their families here, look for jobs here. We're making that impossible, and when college education becomes something that only the wealthy can afford, then we know that only the wealthy are going to be prepared for those better jobs, and you create this cycle which says Those who are wealthy are going to continue to get more opportunities than those who are struggling to make ends meet. What I want us to realize is that what we're talking about here is the result of choices that we make. It's not inevitable that more people live in poverty. It's not inevitable that more people are homeless. It is the result of policy choices we make in Montpelier and in Washington when we make decisions about our budget, about our spending, and particularly about our tax policy. So we need to change those, make better choices, and change those policies, and develop an economy and economic recovery from the ground up, so that we put money in the pockets of average working families, middle-class families, so that they can pay their bills, take care of their kids, and then spend that money on Main Street as opposed to letting wealthy people invest it on Wall Street. They'll tell us that the way to help this economy is that we have to trust the CEOs, because the CEOs are the job creators. Well, I'll tell you, the job creators are the people in this room. Because if you ask the hardware store across the street or the diner across the street what it would take for them to grow their businesses, to hire more people, to strengthen the local economy, you know what they want? They want more customers. They want more people to buy their stuff and use their services. And when people can't afford to even put food on the table, they're not going to have that money available to go out and support local businesses. So we need to think about that. I just want to mention a couple of things that I've been able to do in Montpelier, and believe me, it's not easy being there. We do a lot of great things. We do things like labeling GMOs, we do marriage equality, we do really great things, don't get me wrong. But when it comes to economic justice and when it comes to changing the way the money flows, it is extremely difficult. So after a lot of trouble over the last couple of years, I've been able to do a few things which I think at least set us on that path. One is to move 10% of the state's cash out of private banks and into a credit facility, the local Vermont investment fund, so that we invest our money here in the state of Vermont. A very small step towards what we hope to be a state bank someday. We're also able to pass a bill that encourages, doesn't necessarily require, it's complicated, but encourages the state to buy local and hire Vermonters. We have a lot of money in the state, and what we do is we send that money out of state when we contract with out-of-state corporations or even individuals to do work that Vermonters could be doing. We also passed a bill this year that sets us on the path towards lowering the cost of a Vermont State College, something that we really need to do and is very important. And we did increase the minimum wage. Having said that, I just want to repeat what I said before. We do a lot of good things. These are small steps towards the kind of changes we need to make in our economy. And while we're able to do a lot of wonderful things in Vermont, we can't even touch on healthcare because we don't have the time. We're making some progress, but we have a long way to go. It's really important that we keep our sights on the basic economic changes that we need to pull us not just out of this recession, but to guarantee that we don't have a recovery that leaves too many Vermonters in poverty and too many families struggling, when we have enough wealth to go around, if we're willing to make the choices and the right decisions to make sure that we take care of Vermonters first. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Is Steve Owens here? Steve, come on up and say a word.
Hi, I'm Steve Owens. I'm a teacher, and I live in Calais. And I want to talk to you today about healthcare. And I had the privilege of meeting a lot of you, signing petitions earlier in the morning. I have two stories I want to share. One from my family, one personal story, somebody I knew, to talk about healthcare and hopefully galvanize you into action. First is about my mother. She's now retired. She's living with us in Calais. And she was a unionized civil servant in New York State, upstate New York. And between Medicare and her supplemental insurance, she's well insured. She should be one of the winners. Well, when we were moving her to Vermont, she fell and she broke her arm. And she was taken down to a local urban hospital, to the emergency room. And they took a big drill, and they drilled down into her shoulder and put this huge bolt in, and then there was reinforcing screws that were put in, one of which ended up rubbing against her shoulder blade inside the joint, causing excruciating pain. She had to have a second surgery in order to get that screw out of there. The screw wasn't even needed. Now, Dr. Bean, the orthopedist here in Central Vermont, took one look at this thing and said, this was not necessary. She was overtreated. Well, why was she overtreated? Well, I've got my suspicions. My theory is it was cost shifting. She was a person well insured. They were a hospital that were treating a lot of people who were uninsured. Somehow that has to get paid for. And guess what? It gets paid for. It's sneaky the way it gets done. And they did it in this case, by over-treating my mother and doing something harmful. She cannot even lift her arm above here now because of the damage that was done by that treatment that was wholly unnecessary. So the current healthcare system also hurts people who are well insured. I'm going to tell a second story, a personal one, that really is the thing that motivates me in fighting for healthcare justice. It's the story of a Vermonter who lost his health insurance and then died. And Dennis was a good, hard-working, blue-collar man. Honest, skilled. He plowed our driveway, he was a roofer, he roofed our house, he built our porch, and he had an inoperable, non-cancerous brain tumor, was treated with medication for 10 years. He was sort of a medical miracle, but it was controlled. And that is until his wife, who was a cafeteria worker in a public school system, was thrown off the district's health insurance. And cafeteria workers in this district were not unionized, and so guess who they picked on? Okay, that was, and I looked at that situation. There wasn't too much, they turned to me because I'm a union activist. There wasn't too much we could do. But I also knew in my heart of hearts Dennis would be dead in a year. And unfortunately, I was right. And I didn't fight hard enough for justice there. And as I was preparing my remarks, I was sitting in my living room and I was looking at the blue armchair where Dennis would sit and talk about life with us. And he's gone. And if we all dig deep, we all have our Dennises. And to honor those people and to prevent new ones, we need to join together in a fight for healthcare justice. And what can you do? You can sign our petition. Many of you already did that to on single-payer healthcare for the Workers' Center. We're in the back of the room. Elect officials like Senator Pollina who get it, who get the difference between health insurance and health care. Because we all need health care. We don't need health insurance. And have those conversations with your friends and neighbors, as we were having here today, about single payer and the underlying principles of universality and equity and so forth. And have those conversations with your friends and neighbors. We stand at a really important point here. We can tip this thing over and make it happen, and it's important, and I think we're going to win. Thank you.
Steve, thanks very much for talking about consequences. Okay. Very rare for me to get these things.
Yeah, we're getting older, Bernie.
Let me begin by picking up on some of the themes that we've already heard this morning. And I want to touch on, building on those themes, a few major points. First is, everybody in this room knows, this country faces very, very serious problems. Problems probably more severe than any time since the Great Depression. And if you throw in the crisis of climate change, these might be the most difficult times this country has faced for maybe since the Civil War in this country. A lot of these problems, I think Anthony Pollina made the point well, they can be done. Good public policy, people coming together, doing the right thing for all citizens rather than just 1%, can make a profound difference and create a nation in which all people have a decent standard of living. But, and here is the big but. This is going to be the theme of my remarks. The big but is it ain't going to happen unless there is a political revolution in this country. And what do I mean by political revolution? Not just not rhetoric. What do I mean by that? In the coming election, the pundits tell us, and I suspect they're right, that about 60% of the American people are not going to vote. 40% will vote. Of the 60% who will not vote, probably 70 or 80% of low-income working people will not vote, and probably 70 or 80% of young people will not vote. So while you have tens and tens of millions of people who are struggling today to keep their heads above water, they're not participating in the political process. Democracy for them is irrelevant. They don't see the system working for them at all. That's one reality. And the second reality, in terms of the need for a political revolution, is that people who do know the importance of politics, i.e. the billionaire class, they know how important this stuff is. And they are, as we speak, pouring hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into the political process. So you have a democracy today, and I use the word in quotes, in which the majority of people do not vote in an off-presidential election. The people who are hurting the most do not participate. Polls tell us that over 60% of the American people do not know which political party controls the House or the Senate. Most people in this country do not know, I think that's not true in Vermont, but it is true in many large states, do not know who their member of Congress is, what party he or she belongs to, and what they're doing. What a political revolution means is, number one, you get big money out of politics, you overturn Citizens United, and you move toward public funding of elections. Number two, what a political revolution means is that instead of 40% of the people voting, 80% of the people vote. And when you have that dynamic, the world suddenly changes. Because the issues that elected officials have to deal with are very, very different than the issues that the Koch brothers want us to be dealing with. Now, how do you make that political revolution? That's tough stuff. We'll talk about it. But that is the great challenge that we face, and in my view, nothing significant is going to happen in Washington to change what is going on in America and address the enormously serious problems that we face unless we make that revolution. And every person in this room has got to be part of it. Now, what are the issues? Well, the issues are pretty simple. Many of the issues are pretty simple. Number one, the great middle class of this country, which was once the envy of the entire world. You know, people looked to this country over the years for many, many reasons. My father came to this country without a nickel in his pocket, and he made it into the lower middle class and sent two of his kids to college. And that was a huge achievement. Millions of people, tens of millions of people, all over the world came here. And the middle class could do it. People had the opportunity to move up. Today, as I think everybody in this room knows, the middle class, the great middle class of this country, the envy of the world, is now disappearing. Median family income is now $5,000 less than it was in 1999. Real wages have gone down for tens of millions of people who are now working longer hours for lower wages. Most of the new jobs being created are low-wage, part-time jobs. Now, when you read in the papers, and it says unemployment nationally is 6.1%, it's gone down, you say, well, that's pretty good. But that's not really what unemployment is. Real unemployment includes people, the numbers that I gave you, the official unemployment does not include people who are working part-time, who want to work full-time, does not include people who have given up looking for work. You add those numbers together, you know what real unemployment in America is? It is 12%, not 6%. On top of that, what you are seeing in this country right now is a situation where we have by far the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world. 22% of our kids live in poverty. We have more people living in poverty today in America than any time in the history of this country. And despite the modest improvements in health care that the Affordable Care Act made, we still have 40 million people without health insurance. And as Steve reminded us, and as all of you know, even if you have health insurance, you may have a high deductible or a high copayment that makes you hesitant to go to a doctor when you should. According to a study at Harvard a few years ago, we are losing about 45,000 people a year. You know what? They get sick, and instead of going to the doctor, they don't go to the doctor because they have no health insurance, so they can't afford the deductible. What happens? They get sicker and sicker. And then 6 months later, they crawl into the doctor's office. I see Dr. Matthew here, and he can confirm this, I think. They crawl into the doctor's office, and the doctor says, why didn't you come here 6 months ago? You're really sick now. We're sending you to the hospital. And the patient says, well, I can't afford the bill. I didn't want to come. I don't want charity. We lose about 45,000 people a year under those circumstances. So, country faces enormous economic problems for working families, but at the same time, there is another reality that's going on, and that is the people on top are doing phenomenally well. And I think a lot of the angst in this country and the anger and the confusion has to do, it's not that we are in a depression that impacts everybody. It is a significant economic decline for the vast majority of the people, but at the same time, the people on top are doing phenomenally well. What does that mean? It means that today in the US, we have the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country on earth. Specifically, what does that mean? Let me bore you with a few statistics. Today in America, the top 1% owns 38% of the wealth. Got that? Top 1% owns 38% of the wealth. Who wants to guess what the bottom 60% of the American people own? What's the guess? 2.3%. 2.3%. In terms of income, the situation is not different. Wealth is what you accumulate. And I should say, in terms of wealth, you got a situation where one family, you all know the Walton family, Walton, they own more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people. What do you think about that? One family owns more wealth than the bottom 40%. And the main point that I want to make to you this afternoon, and is the major issue facing our country, is that if we do not get a handle and start turning around this issue of income and wealth inequality, this country will rapidly move toward an oligarchic form of society. You all know what I mean by oligarchic form of society? When we were kids, and we went to school, they would give us textbooks. They talked about oligarchy in Latin America and so forth. What it means, very simple, is that you have a handful of very wealthy families who control the economics of the nation and the politics of this nation. And if anyone thinks that we are not moving there in a very rapid way, you are sorely mistaken. And the challenge that we face, I don't know that we can win this. It is going to be a real tough fight, is how we turn this issue around. Now, income and wealth inequality are moral issues, in the sense, do we feel comfortable in a society in which we are seeing a proliferation of millionaires and billionaires at the same time as we have millions of kids who are getting their nutrition on food stamps, at a time when we have hundreds of thousands of young people who can't afford to go to college, when we have veterans sleeping out in the street. Morally, I think most of us are not comfortable with that. That is not the country we want to be part of. But it becomes an economic and a political issue as well. Economically, this is what it's about. If so few people have so much wealth and income, and about 95% of all new income generated in recent years goes to the top 1%. So since the Wall Street crash, we've seen an economic recovery, but almost all of the new income goes to the people on top. When you have a situation where so few have so much, and so many have so little, it's economic in the sense that you can't create jobs if people do not have disposable income to spend. You understand what I mean? In other words, if I don't have any money in my pocket, I am not going to buy a product. And the person who manufactures that product is not going to have a job. The person who sells that product is not going to have a job. If I don't have any money in my pocket, I don't go to a restaurant. I don't buy a service. People who provide those services do not have a job. My spending is your job. Your spending is my job. And if tens of millions of people have no money to spend, we do not create jobs. So this inequality in terms of income and wealth becomes an economic issue and a jobs issue in that sense. And then profoundly, in recent years, it becomes a political issue in this sense. That what do you think the billionaire class is doing with their money? You think they're putting it under their mattress? They are not. One example, and maybe the most important example. And I want you all to understand this. The Koch brothers alone the Koch brothers are a family that has made a lot of money in fossil fuel. They're into the oil and coal business and other areas. They are the second wealthiest family in the country, now worth $80 billion. Their wealth has gone up from 68 to 80 billion in the last year. This one family is now spending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to elect candidates in the Senate, in the House, and even at statewide levels, legislatures, who will work night and day to make the richest people in this country even richer. Now that's an obscenity unto itself. Nobody, in my view, no matter what your views are, should be able to buy elections. Well, let me tell you what their views are, because the media does a pretty bad job of reporting them. In 1980, David Koch ran for Vice President of the United States on the Libertarian Party. And he did pretty poorly. Their party got 1% of the vote. But what is scary is that the ideas that they advocated in 1980, which at that point were called, they were jokes, they were fringe, they were crazy ideas. All of those ideas are now mainstream ideas in the Republican Party. And that is what the transformation of American politics is about. Now, what are those ideas? Well, Koch brothers said, we believe that Social Security should be ended, not cut, ended. We believe that Medicare should be ended. We believe that Medicaid should be ended. We believe that the Environmental Protection Agency should be ended. We believe that we should virtually do away with all taxation, meaning lowering taxes very substantially for the wealthiest people in this country. And they also believe that virtually all government programs, whether it's Head Start, whether it's job training, whether it's federal aid to education, should also be abolished. In other words, their concept of government, what they mean by freedom, is a situation where all of the fights and struggles that the American people have waged for the last 80 years, every single program designed to protect the elderly, the children, working people, the sick, the poor, every one of those programs is gone. And we will return to the days where if you're poor and if you're old and if you have no health care, maybe somebody will throw you a coin. Maybe some church will provide you with a little bit of welfare and a little bit of charity. But you will have no rights at all. That is what they believe, and that is what they are spending hundreds of millions of dollars now to achieve. And it is not clear that they will not be successful. They have made huge progress in the last 30 or 40 years. Right now in Washington, some of us are working hard to try to raise the minimum wage because we understand that $7.25 an hour is a starvation wage. The bill on the floor doesn't go as far as I would like. It's a step forward. It would be $10.10 an hour, which is a wage increase for 25 million Americans. You know what the Koch brothers and most Republicans now believe? They are not just opposed to raising the minimum wage. They want to abolish the concept of the minimum wage. You're laughing, but that is exactly what they believe, because they think we are taking away people's freedom when you have the government making sure that at least there is a minimum wage. At least there are some safety standards in places where people work. They want the government out of all. And if corporations want to dump junk into our rivers and our lakes in the air, they have the right to do that. Because you don't want to impede the freedom of these companies to do whatever the hell they want to do. That is the struggle that we are waging right now. Of a group of people, and they're not alone. Some of you may have remembered a couple of months ago, a remarkable political event in America. Sheldon Adelson. You know who Sheldon Adelson is? He's not as wealthy. He's a pauper compared to the Koch brothers. He's only worth $38 billion. And he lives in Las Vegas, and he invited a number of prospective Republican candidates to come visit him and tell him what they were going to do for him. And if he ended up liking them, he would provide huge sums of money into their campaigns. That's where we are in terms of the political process. Now, what do we have to do to turn that around? Well, that's what the struggle is about. And that's what the political revolution is about. So number one, very high on my agenda, is the need to overturn Citizens United. Billionaires in this country should not be allowed to buy elections. Number two, what do we want to do? What we want to do is move toward public funding of elections so that anybody who has a degree of support, it's not anybody's going to get a check, you have to show that you have a certain amount of support, can get public funding. There'll be a limit to the amount that can be spent, and you can have free elections in the sense that people do not have to get all of their money from millionaires. They don't have to be wealthy themselves, but they can get enough money to run a significant campaign. So that is the struggle. And we are now fighting to make sure this country does not become an oligarchic form of society. All right, in the midst of all this, what is a progressive agenda in Washington? What are some of us trying to do? If you ask the American people, in any poll that I have seen, what their top priority is, you know what their top priority is? What is it? Jobs in the economy. Jobs in the economy. We can put millions of people to work within a year if we invest in rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. What do I mean by that? That is roads, that is bridges, water plants, wastewater plants, rail, dams, old schools. We can put huge numbers of people to work rebuilding our infrastructure, and that is exactly what we should be doing. Second of all, as I mentioned earlier, we've got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. Third of all, we have to deal with the issue of education. Right now, back up, 30 years ago, the United States led the world in terms of the percentage of our people who graduated college. And as everybody in this room knows, in a highly competitive global economy, to get most of the decent jobs out there, you need a good education. 30 years ago, we led the world. Who knows what place we're in today? Anyone know? We're in 12th place. So you got many countries around the world who understand something that we don't understand. And that if somebody's going to make it into the middle class, they, in most cases, not all cases, but in many cases, need a college degree. And second of all, if we're going to be competitive globally, we need to have a well-educated workforce. 50 years ago, getting a high school degree was a big deal. Today, a college degree is equivalent to what a high school degree was 50 years ago. Our job has got to be, and we need legislation to do this, to make it very clear, that every person, and not just young people, a lot of middle-aged people who want more education, who need more education, everybody in this country, regardless of income, should be able to get higher education, period. And then we have to deal with this obscenity, this unbelievable horror story of young people graduating college with debt of 30, 40, 50,000. If they're going to graduate school or medical school, we had a meeting a couple of months ago with a young woman who was practicing. She's a physician. She graduated medical school with $300,000 in debt. People graduate dental school, $250,000 in debt. It should not be a crime to go to medical school or dental school or graduate school. You should not have to be saddled with that debt for the rest of your life. So we have got to understand how important education is and make sure that people get the education they need, regardless of their income, and that they do not come out of school deeply in debt. Now, there's another issue I want to touch on, and that is the issue of Social Security. And here I have some very good news, and it tells me how we should be doing politics in this country. And I want all of you to think back a few years ago. A few years ago, you had these guys on television saying, well, Social Security is going broke, and Social Security is adding to our very large deficit. Therefore, it's very distasteful to us, but we're just going to have to cut Social Security, and we have no alternative. That was the position of virtually every Republican. That was the position of many Democrats. And sadly enough, that was the position of the President of the United States, who supported what is called a chain CPI. Anybody here know what a chain CPI is?
Yes.
What a chain CPI is a fancy term to cut the cost of living increases for people on Social Security. And actually, over a period of time, there'd be very significant cuts. A couple of us in the Senate started a group called the Defending Social Security Caucus. We reached out to seniors, we reached out to trade unionists, to women's organizations, to people with disability, to the veterans community. The result of all of that is that we created an uproar around the country. And you know what happened? Nobody today is talking about cutting Social Security. In fact, what the discussion now is what it should always have been, not cutting Social Security, but expanding Social Security. And how do you do that? Well, I'll tell you how to do it. Some of you may know this, some of you may not. Right now, somebody's worth $10 million a year, makes $10 million a year. Somebody makes $117,000 a year. They are both contributing the same amount into the Social Security Trust. You all know that? Because of the cap. The cap is now at $117,000. If you scrap the cap, and you don't even have to start at $117,000, you start at $250,000. Scrap it above that, you can fund Social Security for 40 more years than the 19 years it now has, and increase benefits to Social Security beneficiaries, which is exactly what we should be doing. Well, a couple of other issues. The issue of civil liberties is a very big issue. We have seen in recent years, both at the government level and in the private sector level, something that is very scary. And I don't know exactly how you deal with it with all of the new technology. We know that the NSA in recent years has been collecting, not necessarily looking, but filing every phone call that you make. Every phone call that you make, the government now knows who you called, when you made that call, where you made that call from. It doesn't mean to say they're listening to what you say, but they have. Meanwhile, the NSA is getting into people's emails and into the websites that they visit. In my view, terrorism is in fact a very, very serious issue. And we've got to do everything we can to protect the American people from another 9/11. But I believe from the bottom of my heart that we can do this with strong law enforcement, strong intelligence. You can do it without undermining the Constitution of the United States and the civil liberties that make us a free country. So that's an issue we've got to focus on very, very closely. Let me conclude by talking about an issue. You know, it's hard to always say what is the most important issue out there, because all of these issues are of huge importance. But there's one, you know, that kind of the future of the planet depends on, and that is the issue of global warming. It is, and I say this not sure you all know what my politics are, but, and I don't mean to be partisan, but it is very dismaying that we have a major political party, heavily influenced by energy companies, that is rejecting basic science. It is hard to run a modern, civilized society if you reject basic science. You know, we go to a doctor's office with the assumption that the doctor went to medical school and knows something about what he or she is doing. And we rely on scientists to help us understand the world that we live in and move forward. based on that understanding. Well, the scientific community is very, very clear. Global warming is real. It is significantly caused by human activity. It is already, not 10 years from now, it is already causing devastating problems in this country and around the world in terms of drought, in terms of flooding, in terms of extreme weather disturbances, these incredible downpours that we're seeing. And what organizations like the CIA and the Defense Department tell us is this is an issue of national security. Because if you have droughts all over the world, or people can't find water, or they can't grow food, what do you think happens? It increases international tension if people are migrating from one area to another. Now, the good news is that, in fact, if we had the political will, if we had a Republican Party that was willing to listen to science, we kind of know what we can do. And there's some really good examples. I've helped bring in tens of millions of dollars into the state, which has gone toward weatherizing many thousands of people's homes. You know what happens when your home gets weatherized? Your carbon emissions go down by 30 or 40%, your fuel bill goes down, and we create jobs. We got to do that all over America. We have got to be moving aggressively toward wind, solar, geothermal, and biomass. We have got to be moving towards sustainable energy. And when you do that, we can find that the United States of America is leading the world in terms of transforming our energy system, which is exactly what we have to do. All right? So let me conclude in the way that I began. The issues facing this country are huge, but I think that we can deal with them if we educate and if we organize. The opposition has huge sums of money. They have a totally reactionary agenda, which is designed to protect the top 1% against the needs of the bottom 90%. So what we need to do is educate. What we need to do is organize. What we need to do is defeat oligarchy in this country. What we need to do is grow the middle class and undo this horrendous and unfair distribution of wealth and income. That is our challenge. And if we educate, and if we organize, I believe that we can win this. But it's not a sure thing. These guys have unbelievable power. They are very, very smart, and they are moving very aggressively. So that's the task, and I look forward to working with you in the years to come to make sure that we win this fight for our kids and our grandchildren. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Bernie. My name is Gwen Hallsmith, and I'm here speaking on behalf of Vermonters for a New Economy, and I serve as the director of the Public Banking Institute, which is a national group pushing for public and postal banks around the country. And I'd like to applaud your efforts to address what we see as the root cause of the inequality that you're talking about, and that is its basis in the banking and monetary system. We have an opportunity right now to use the $100 billion that have been levied against the largest banks in fines since 2008 to try and turn the system around. If what is required to establish and capitalize a bank is $25 million, it's only 1% of that fine that could establish public and postal banks all across this country. And then the interest from the lending that they do for education, for jobs, and for housing, and for infrastructure goes back to the public to build more jobs, educate more people, and refurbish more infrastructure. So I'd really like you to take a leadership role in turning the banking and monetary system around. Thank you.
I absolutely agree with you, Gwen. Question of leadership roles, there's only 24 hours a day, there's a limited number of things to do. But she raises an enormously important issue. Here's the story. What we end up doing, first thing, all of you are aware that the reason that our economy collapsed was because of the greed and recklessness and illegal behavior on Wall Street.
Correct.
And while these guys have gotten away, and I use the word, just quite literally, with murder. I mean, as a result of this recession, We've seen suicide rates go up. People have lost their homes, they've lost their housing, they've lost their life savings. These crooks have helped to destroy the American economy. And their punishment for that was a huge bailout, not only from the Treasury, but it was also the Fed provided trillions of dollars. We did the first audit of the Fed ever done. You don't know this, but what we learned is during the financial crisis, the Fed provided $16 trillion, got that? $1 trillion of revolving low-interest loans to every financial institution in this country. And around the world, central banks around the world, and large corporations. So your point is, and now, by the way, 5 out of the 6 financial institutions that we bailed out because they were too big to fail, guess what? They're bigger today than they were when we bailed them out because they were too big to fail. I didn't vote for the bailout. All right. So you're asking, do we need a different type of banking system? Should states and localities and individuals be able to put their money into institutions which reinvest in their communities in meaningful ways to improve our lives and create jobs? And the answer is absolutely yes. So I'm sympathetic to state banks and will work in any way that we can. On that issue, the other thing that I'm interested in, by the way, when we talk about fairly radical changes in the economy, is worker-owned businesses. And we're working on legislation that would make it easier for workers to be able to run their own enterprises. But that's a great question. Thank you.
Jessica Miller, if you have, in the medical community, you have these large medical organizations gobbling up all of the small clinics and the private practices, how do you get, and their policies, their protocol is being imposed on all of us, and a lot of it's not very good, as your friend at the beginning was talking about, here in Vermont. If you have single payer or universal health care, which I'm for, how do you then, even though we know how that the care will be paid for, how then do you control the costs and the fraud that has been committed by these huge organizations and hospitals mainly? And
all right, let me just say, that's a long enough answer. Let me try this. Look, you're never going to have a perfect healthcare system, that's for sure. But this is what we do. We know that in the United States today, we spend substantially more than do the people of any other country on healthcare. You all know that, right? Almost twice as much. The result is, despite that spending, 40 million uninsured, many more underinsured, and our healthcare outcomes are not particularly good in terms of infant mortality, in terms of longevity, how long we live, in terms of the number of illnesses, we do not necessarily do so good. Now, why is that? Because the function, by and large, of today's healthcare system is not to provide quality care in the most cost-effective way. Now, that's a tough challenge. You know, people, how do you do that? That's tough. But the function of the healthcare system today is to make as much money as possible for the insurance companies, who then distort the medical needs of the people. You have drug companies which charge us by far more than any other country on earth. So I'm not going to here to tell you that a single payer universal system is going to end all problems. It is not. But it will be a major step forward in controlling costs because you'll have a simpler system. Everybody is in the system. We don't have all of these insurance companies. You don't have to spend your life filling out forms. Doctors do not have to spend half their days arguing with insurance companies of whether you not get the drugs you need. That's what universal single-payer system is about. How you make that work well is not so easy. It's going to be a challenge. But I hope very much that the state of Vermont will lead the way. And I think when we do it, what you will find is that every person in this state will have quality health care, will have nobody uninsured, and we'll do that for no more than we're currently spending. I think that's the goal that we have to try to reach.
I think I kind of have some bad news for the local economy for now anyway.
Your name is?
Corinna Jordan. I just wrote a letter today addressed to Leah Barabo. Leah's been my caseworker at the Vermont State Housing Authority since she took that job when my first caseworker left the agency. And I wrote to Leah that I have chosen to disenroll from the HUD Vermont State Housing Authority Section 8 program. I have fundamental disagreements with the limitations it places on me, a homeowner. To wit, it limits my ability to have guests to 2 weeks per year. It takes away my choice of family and choice to make roommate decisions and subjects all potential housemates to an invasive screening process rife with potential inaccuracies and hearsay, and which inappropriately compels a homeowner to assist in policing functions, unreasonable search and seizure. Please disenroll me from this program effective immediately. I do thank you for your loving, careful, and thoughtful attention and wise and judicious counsel over the last couple of years. I remain respectfully Corinna G. Jordan.
I am familiar with the issues that Corinna has spoken. And Corinna, if we can be of help to you, we're happy to try to, but thank you for raising these issues. Okay, other questions?
Thank you. My name is Kathy Shapiro. I'm from Middlesex, and my question is as much for people here as it is for you, Bernie. All of you in the past 3-4 weeks have probably been unable to avoid the news about what's happening in Israel and in Gaza. It is an incredible, it's been an incredible 3 weeks of slaughter. To date, 2,000 Palestinians have died. About 70% of them are civilians. Almost 500 of them are children. 10,000 people have been wounded, and we're talking about healthcare here. Healthcare in Gaza is so restricted by the siege that even when bombing is not going on, there are not enough hospitals and clinics to serve the people who are there. Israel blockades, besieges, and bombs a stateless people who are cut off from the world, and we in the United States reward them with arms and dollars. And the Senate voted its support with Resolution 498 in the midst of this massacre just a few weeks ago. This resolution condemns only Hamas, but it says nothing about what Israel is doing. 1,000 civilians have died in Gaza, 3 civilians have died in Israel. In sending this money to Israel and replenishing their weapons supply at the same time that they're continuing to bomb hospitals, schools, homes, and UN shelters for people whose homes have been destroyed, what are we saying? Are we saying that 1,000 Palestinian lives are worth far less than 3 Israeli lives? Bernie, because you did not vote to support Resolution 498, you, along with 18 other senators, I see that as somewhat of a positive move. However, are you going to go further? And I also think this is to be linked to the economic issues that you're talking about, with $30 billion going to Israel over the next 10 years. So, thank you.
Thank you for your question. And let me repeat. I very much dislike people disrupting me. You asked a good question, it's a reasonable question, it's an important issue, I'm going to answer it. And that's what we have to do. There's a police officer here, and it bothers me that police officers have to be here. They got a lot of work to do. And in Vermont, we should not have to have that. So I feel strongly about people disrupting. But you've asked the question. Let me do this, probably the best thing. I sent out a letter. We got a number of people raising exactly the same concerns you did. So if you'll forgive me, let me read the letter, which deals with your issues. All right? Here's
I'll read your letter, but go ahead.
all right, here it is.
I'll read your letter. People all read your letter.
Have you all read? All right. All right, many of you have. All right, let me just touch it. Because I think, I'm sorry, your first name is?
Kathy.
Kathy raises some very important issues. Number one, has Israel or anybody in this room happy or feel good about the kind of civilian death that we've seen in Gaza? The answer is no. Has Israel overreacted? Have they bombed UN facilities? The answer is yes. That is terribly, terribly wrong in my mind. On the other hand, and there is another hand on this issue, you have a situation where Hamas is sending missiles into Israel effect. And you know where some of those missiles are coming from? They're coming from populated areas. That's a fact. Hamas has used money that came into Gaza for construction purposes, and God knows they need roads and all the things that they need, and used some of that money to build these very sophisticated tunnels into Israel for military purposes.
For survival purposes.
Okay, one second. No, I don't want to be interrupted. The question was asked, it's a fair question, and I'm trying to... Okay, you see,
have the right to
look,
resist.
if you don't...
Yes, they did.
You don't...
Gaza is like
Excuse me, shut up! You don't have the microphone. You've asked... You know, I don't want police officers here.
You're going to arrest people?
No, I'm not going to arrest people, but are you going to allow us... Are you going to allow us to have a discussion?
Well,
Or you think
you come down here. You're right there. Come down and be democratic. Join the discussion with the people.
Are you asking to be quiet?
Occupied populations
Can I-
have the right to resist.
All right. You're entitled to your view. You've asked a question, I'm answering it. This is called democracy.
Let him finish.
All right?
I would like
All right, I am answering a question, and I do not want to be disturbed and disrupted. All right? You're not the only people here. Kathy asked a reasonable question, and I'm trying to answer it, and I don't want to be disrupted. All right? In my view, you're entitled to your view, I am entitled to my view. In my view, Hamas has done those things, and on top of that, Hamas is very clear. They want, their view is that Israel should not have a right to exist. That's the fact.
Bullshit!
All right. You know what?
It's a service organization! It's not true. It's not a dirty word!
Okay. You
It's
know,
not just a
you know,
terrorist group, it's a service organization.
All right.
The word
Furthermore,
means something to people,
okay.
like Israel!
Can I finish my remarks?
Fine,
And the
then tell
answer
the
is-
truth.
You know, if you can't come to a meeting and ask a question, then please, don't come to me. All right, furthermore, this issue of Gaza is not the only issue right now in that region. And some of you may have noticed there's a group called ISIS. You know what ISIS is? ISIS is excuse me! ISIS is a group receiving money from around the world that wants to convert parts of Iraq and Syria into a 7th century caliphate. You know what women's rights are in that area? They're below, excuse me,
Let him talk.
Nobody wants to listen to
they
you
are,
screaming.
nobody wants to listen, they can
All right,
read.
I don't need to be patted on the back right now.
All right. So you have a situation right now where we are figuring out in that region how you deal with people who have tens of thousands of very armed and aggressive people who may be making significant gains in that area. So the point that I'm making is, yeah, I share your concerns about Israeli overreaction. I was not one of the people who signed on to that resolution. But the issue is broader. I believe in a two-state solution. I would hope that the United States, in a very, very difficult situation where the leadership on both sides is not particularly good, can finally work out a situation where Israel has the right to exist in security. At the same time, the Palestinians have a state of their own. And that's what I would like to see. Okay? They've been working on it for the last 50 years. I'm sorry, I don't have the magic answer. This is a very depressing and difficult issue. This has gone on for 60 bloody years. Year after year, war after. If you're asking me, do I have a magical solution? I don't. And you know what? I doubt very much that you do. Okay, that is my answer. Some of you, I hear that some of you don't like it. You have better ideas, that's great. Let me get some other questions here. So let me get some other questions.
The Turks, when that happened, we closed the tunnels off. We didn't have to bomb. Let it
Hi.
rest.
You hold the mic up to your mouth.
Bernie, this is taking a different direction.
I'm sorry, I can't. Excuse me. Yes, sir.
You know me, Chip Troiano from Stanton. What I wanted to say, Bernie, is thank you from the veterans in here for one of the most significant pieces of legislation that has gone through the Senate in years. It was your fortitude and your standing in there that got this done. and we appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And I give you work really hard. Anybody here use the VA? We got people who use the Veterans of Pittsburgh? What can I hear you?
You're asking about the VA?
Yes.
I'm delighted.
Okay. Anybody else use the VA? See, one of the things that... Okay. All right. There is a war going on underneath the surface of everything we did. There are people who want to not only privatize Social Security and Medicare, they ultimately want to privatize the VA as well. And give everybody a coupon rather than have the VA exist as it does right now. We fought very hard to deal with the serious problem of long waiting lines around much of the country and other parts of the country, not so much in Vermont. And we put $5 billion into hiring new doctors and nurses and medical personnel, put $10 billion to making sure that veterans can get emergency care in the private sector. And we also put money into dealing with sexual abuse, so the people who are sexually abused in the military can get good help at the VA. And we did something that I'm very proud of. We lost some 6,700 soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. What this bill will do is allow the wives of those soldiers to get a college education. And that's pretty good as well. So I'm happy about that.
Yes, I'm Larry Gochi, and I live here in Cabot. My concern is I've got the insurance, the extra insurance on my Social Security, and every 2 months it's cost me about $250 for my medicine because I'm in a donut hole when I get in that donut hole, which is about $500 or more a month. And I'd like to see something change. I never knew about the donut hole until I got into it. I think they ought to change that to your pocketbook, but, you know, it's quite a bit of money.
The answer is you're right, and the donut hole is shrinking, which means you'll have to pay less out of pocket. One of the advantages, getting back to your question, of what a single-payer national healthcare system will do, is it understands that prescription drugs are a part of healthcare. We have, Dr. Matthew, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is about 1 out of 4 people cannot afford to fill the prescriptions that the doctors write. So you go to the doctor and people can't afford to fill the prescriptions. So obviously, if people can't afford it, they should get those prescriptions. It's part of their health care. So to answer your question, it is an issue we're working on. I think you're going to see in the next couple of years that donor hole shrinking even more and less out-of-pocket expense for you. Okay, a couple more questions. Dr. Matthew.
And when they don't get medicine...
Stand up so everybody can hear.
Hi. When they
You all know John is the, what are you, John? The CEO. Dr. Matthew runs the Plainfield Community Health Center. Does a great job. That's a beautiful facility.
So when people don't get their medicine, they end up going to the emergency room more, being admitted to the hospital more, and costing far more than their medicine. The smart decision would be maintenance medicines are free. We'd actually make it up on other places we'd save. I should also make the point that Bernie's been extremely helpful with getting community health centers, federally qualified health centers in the state. They're now 11. And people who are patients there have access to a thing called 340B pharmaceuticals. Sometimes they cost 1/10 of retail. And the people that we deal with, when they
So
get...
somebody, he has diabetes. Is that correct, sir? Yes?
What's that?
You're dealing with diabetes?
Yes.
All right. He is paying, he's having, out of your own pocket, you're paying how much? $500 a month?
Yeah.
if you, first of all, you get the donut hole slower if you pay less en route. And we have, for example, long-term insulin Lantus, Levomir, 5 injectables cost about $480. We have that for about $15. So when you get to the donut hole, in our system, we switch you into another pharmacy benefits manager, which is kind of us behind the curtain, and you get across it a lot, you have to get to the end of the year. You get across a lot cheaper, maybe 1/3 of the cost. But everybody, almost everybody in Vermont now could go to community health center, and you can get access to that sort of pharmaceutical help.
How many of you go to the community health center in Plainfield? Anybody go there? What we did, and John has done a great job, we now have 11 of them. The beauty of them is by law, they've got to provide health care, dental care, mental health counseling, and low-cost prescription drugs. And now about, what, something like 25% of the people in Vermont get their health care through these facilities, all right?
40% of Medicaid.
40% of the people on Medicare. There we go. Okay, a couple more questions.
Burnett.
Yes.
Okay, I want to thank you for coming out and subjecting yourself to us time and time and time again, and for the work that you do effectively in Washington. Renee Carpenter, live in East Montpelier. The one thing, I must be low on batteries, the one thing that you have not mentioned that affects everything that we've spoken about is about media. You talked a little bit about free TV, but I remember the congressional town meetings on media reform right at the beginning of the Iraq War. Standing crowds, people aren't talking about it as much, and it is even more urgent. Net neutrality is what allows so many of us to know more about what's really going on, about not only the controversy in Palestine, but also who ISIS is and who ISIS is not. If you look carefully and follow into independent media sources, which now, fortunately, we can still reach, if you have the time, it is helpful to get through some of the propaganda of who Hamas is and who Hamas isn't, and to broaden the dialogue about what really is happening. And I don't want to bring up a controversial issue. All sides of my family were very fortunate to escape Eastern Europe and Germany at the turn of the last century. So I feel very fortunate, and I think that it is extremely important not only to address net neutrality, free access to information, but also for your staffers to dig more deeply, to inform you more deeply, so that even though you may not be able to do anything effectively in Congress, because we understand 90% of global media is controlled by the same 300 or 400 or 500 people that control everything else. I know you know this. You have better numbers than I do.
I do. You're raising a very, very important point.
Thank you.
Okay. Maybe one last question. Phil, got somebody back there? No, she had a question already. Why don't go over there? Let's just make sure everybody has one question.
Hi, Bernie. I'm Mary Alice Bisbee from Montpelier, and I just want to tell Dr. Matthews I can't go to the Plainfield Health Center because we don't pay in there. It costs a fortune to go to the dentistry. But my question is, are you going to run for president? And with Elizabeth Warren, we would love to have it.
That's for another day. We'll talk about it. All right, let me just say this. Let me tell you, I want to be frank. I am embarrassed, and I feel this strongly, that we need police officers here. It breaks my heart, because this is Vermont, and we should not have this. I have never run away from any question that anyone asks. But we don't survive in a democracy unless there's civility. My job is to be here and not run away from your questions. But your job is not to disrupt public meetings. And I feel that strongly. I want to thank the police officers. I want to thank the police officers for being here, but we're understaffed as a police department in the state. And there are other things that they should be doing rather than dealing with this. So that upsets me. But let me just conclude. All right? The way I began. This country today faces very serious problems. We are fighting for the survival of the middle class. There is a billionaire class out there that is spending huge sums of money to destroy every program. You've resigned, you're not into affordable housing, don't worry. The Koch brothers get their way, there will not be affordable housing. You won't be, okay, there won't be, doesn't matter. There will not be Medicare or Medicaid. There will not be the community health centers. They believe in a world where the billionaires have it all and working families have nothing. And believe me, we are fighting really, really hard, and I'm not clear what the outcome is going to be. But what I do know is there are a lot more of us than there are of them. They got all the money. But we do have the people. And if we are smart, and if we're educated, and if we organize, and if we don't turn against each other because of this issue or that issue, we can in fact win this struggle, and I hope we do. Thank you all very much.